Hi everyone. Today we'll discuss how red-eyed tree frog embryo escape hatching success during wasp attacks increases with developmental changes in behavior. Escape hatching is an adaptive embryo defense mechanism seen across taxa, but red-eyed tree frogs, Agalychnis callidryas, are particularly well studied. These tree frogs lay their eggs in vegetation overhanging neotropical ponds and will typically hatch in 6 to 7 days if left undisturbed. However, embryos can also hatch prematurely when exposed to risk cues such as hypoxia from flooding and mechanosensory cues from predators. This adaptive behavior is selected by fitness tradeoffs across hatching. By remaining in their eggs, embryos risk continued exposure to a variety of threats, such as fungus and attacks from terrestrial predators. However, premature hatchlings, like this little guy right here, suffer higher predation in the aquatic environment. This risk lowers as embryos develop, and older embryos have a higher escape rate when attacked. For instance, when eggs are attacked by wasps, fewer younger embryos escape hatch than in older embryos. As you can see here, this wasp, Polybia rejecta, quickly ruptures the embryo's capsule, extracting it from its egg and taking it off screen, presumably to be killed. None of its siblings attempt to escape hatch in response. In contrast, far more older embryos escape hatch. Here, the wasp takes an embryo, and you can already see the neighbors beginning the escape hatching process. They're performing a shaking behavior, which releases a hatching enzyme before rupturing their eggs and escaping. This developmental increase has been demonstrated in previous studies. This 2006 study showed that more 5-day-old embryos escaped than 4-day-old, and we confirmed this in our own study, demonstrating a similar increase between ages. We know that hatching success during wasp attacks increases with development. However, the cause of this developmental change is unknown. So, what causes the increase? There are 3 possible explanations. First, risk assessment changes as embryos age. Older embryos can risk novel exposure to aquatic predators by hatching, but younger embryos may choose to avoid this, remaining in their egg and risking continued wasp exposure instead. Next, escape hatching performance may improve with age. If older embryos are better at hatching, they may do so quicker, while younger embryos have increased exposure time to the wasp. Finally, there may be a sensory constraint on less developed younger embryos, making them less sensitive to vibrations from the wasp or from their attacked neighbors. This is a general outline of what can happen during a wasp attack and will help us illustrate where we may expect to see developmental changes. After the wasp arrives on the clutch, she walks around and investigates eggs. At this point, embryos can either hatch preemptively or they may experience an attack. After an attack, the embryo can either rupture its own egg and escape hatch or be ruptured by the wasp. The embryo can now take this last opportunity to escape, or the embryo is extracted by the wasp and taken away from the clutch. We expect this sequence to change developmentally depending on the influence of our predictions. First, if the developmental increase in escape hatching success is due to variation in risk assessment, we expect older embryos to escape at any point in time rather than face further wasp threats, while younger embryos risk remaining in their egg capsule. Next, if the escape success is instead due to variation in hatching performance, we would expect older embryos to hatch faster in response to an attack, while young, slow-to-hatch embryos are taken more often. Finally, if younger embryos' lower success is due to a sensory constraint, we'd expect older embryos to hatch preemptively, while younger embryos are unable to sense threatening cues from the wasp or from their neighbors. To test these predictions, we conducted wasp predation experiments and recorded wasp-embryo interactions and embryo fates. We looked at 2 ages, 4 and 5 days, and compared embryo fates across ages. We knew that older embryos escape more often, but we wanted to understand why this happens. We specifically looked at embryos that either escaped or were taken and presumed to be killed. Of those that lived, many had their egg capsule ruptured by the wasp during an attack, but still managed to escape. Others ruptured their own egg and escaped hatch. We found that older embryos escaped by hatching more than younger embryos did, with younger embryos requiring a wasp to rupture their egg first. Of those that were killed, most were extracted from their eggs by the wasp regardless of age, but a few were taken by the wasp after a failed escape hatching attempt. This gave us information about how embryos lived or died, but we still want to learn more about how they got there. In order to answer this question further, we analyzed the sequence of events that led to these fates based on this simple outline here. And we found the interactions were far more complex than we anticipated. We realized our previous depiction was too simple, namely due to the high occurrence of wasps returning to previously attacked eggs and attacking them a second time. So we added an additional step, attack 2 on an intact egg and attack 2 on a ruptured egg. Now I want you to look at the green and the orange arrows, indicating differences between ages. As you may see, there are actually very few times embryos respond differently. To make this simpler, I'm going to show a modified figure highlighting the important areas and how they relate to our predictions. Starting at the top, 30% of older embryos hatched preemptively and escaped before a wasp even attacked them. In contrast, over 90% of younger embryos did not hatch and were instead attacked by wasps. This suggests that older embryos are picking up signals from the wasp and responding by hatching, whether it's the wasp prodding their egg as they investigate or a neighbor being attacked like we saw in the video. Younger embryos are not responding. This could indicate two things. Older embryos have less to risk in the aquatic environment and are therefore making different behavioral decisions, or younger embryos are just not sensitive enough to respond to these low amplitude vibration cues. We cannot separate these two possible explanations here, and both are likely. Next, the second difference. After embryos are attacked and ruptured by wasps, most older embryos escape from their egg while most younger embryos remain in their ruptured egg. Instead of hatching, these younger embryos are then attacked a second time by a returning wasp. Unlike in the differences in preemptive hatching rates, these results suggest a clear difference in behavior. The embryos are receiving a strong cue from the wasp. Their capsules are being ruptured and they're exposed to changes in pressure, oxygen, etc. In response, older embryos decide to hatch, doing so faster, and can successfully escape. Younger embryos choose to remain despite the clear threat, and they can still grow in a ruptured capsule if the wasp does not return. For younger embryos, this may be a less risky choice over being exposed to aquatic predators. This suggests a clear difference in risk assessment with age. Finally, we found no variation in escaping success once embryos attempted to hatch, and embryos performed this behavior just as quickly regardless of age. Likewise, we saw no change in the rate of embryos being successfully taken once extracted. So even though older embryos are larger and stronger, if younger ones try to hatch, they can escape just as well. Overall, we found a clear developmental improvement in escape hatching success, but hatching performance does not contribute to this developmental increase. It is the differences in embryo behavior and risk assessment, along with cue sensitivity, leading to older embryos having higher escape success during wasp attacks. So what we've learned from this work is that behavioral plasticity of embryos clearly depends on developmental changes in risk assessment, in addition to the ability to sense environmental cues. Of course, these life or death decisions strongly affect embryo fitness and also demonstrate just how rapidly behavioral responses to stimuli can change with development. I want to say thank you to my mentors, Brandon and Karen, as well as Alina for recording these videos in 2016, and to all of Team treefrog for their support and advice. I'm currently traveling and unable to be present for the Q&A, but please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have. Thank you for giving me your time today.